Working the box office at an old, rundown theater wasn't glamorous, but I liked the routine. The steady rhythm of ticket sales and the familiar hum of movie enthusiasts made my shifts bearable. The theater itself had a certain charm despite its age, a relic of a time when going to the movies was an event. It had creaky floors, faded red carpeting, and decorative moldings that had long since lost their luster. It was a quiet evening, unusually slow for a Friday. Only a handful of patrons milled about the lobby, some grabbing snacks while others lingered near the framed posters of upcoming films. My manager, a gruff but kind man named Paul, approached me with a small stack of film reels. "Take these up to the projection booth," he said. "We've got a screening tomorrow, and I need these ready to go." I hated the projection booth. It wasn't just that it was cramped and dimly lit. It was the eerie quiet that unnerved me. It always felt like the kind of place where shadows lingered just a little too long. I nodded reluctantly and took the reels, their weight adding to the unease building in my chest. The stairwell leading up to the booth was even worse. The air felt heavy, and each creak of the wooden stairs seemed amplified in the silence. By the time I reached the door, I was already regretting my decision to take the job that day. The door was slightly ajar, and the dim light spilling out into the hallway only made it more foreboding. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside and froze. The small room was in disarray. Papers were scattered across the floor, and the chair at the desk was turned away, facing the far wall. The faint hum of the projector filled the room, but it did little to mask the unsettling atmosphere. Someone had been here recently, though there shouldn't have been anyone else upstairs. Setting the reels down on the cluttered desk, I glanced around nervously. The shadows cast by the single overhead bulb seemed to shift with every movement, and my breath quickened as I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. I told myself it was nothing. Probably Paul, rummaging around earlier and forgetting to clean up. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Just as I turned to leave, I noticed something on the floor near the desk. It was a box cutter, its blade slightly extended. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't recall ever seeing one in the booth before. My mind raced, trying to justify its presence. Maybe it had been left behind by someone making repairs. But deep down, I knew that didn't explain the mess or the eerie stillness of the room. Clutching the doorframe for support, I forced myself to take a deep breath. I just needed to finish my shift and get out of there. Or so I thought. I tried to shake the lingering unease as I descended the creaky wooden stairs back to the lobby, but my mind kept circling back to the box cutter. It wasn't just its presence that unnerved me, it was the way it had been left out, as if deliberately placed to catch someone's attention. I resolved to mention it to Paul later, though I wasn't entirely sure how to explain my rising paranoia without sounding ridiculous. The rest of the shift passed quietly, almost eerily so. Only a handful of patrons trickled in for the late-night showing, and the lobby felt unusually empty. The familiar sounds of the popcorn machine and distant movie dialogue provided some comfort, but the unease from the projection booth clung to me like a shadow. Around 10:30 p.m., the credits for the final screening rolled, and the last few patrons filtered out of the theater. Paul, as always, had already locked himself in his office to tally the day's receipts, leaving me to close up on my own. Normally, I didn't mind the solitude. It gave me time to wipe down the counters and organize the ticket stubs without interruption. But tonight, the emptiness felt heavier, as though the building itself was holding its breath. As I finished wiping down the concession stand, I thought I heard something faint, a muffled thud echoing from somewhere upstairs. I froze, the rag slipping from my hand as I strained to listen. Another thud followed, slightly louder this time, and my heart began to race. It was coming from the projection booth. I grabbed my phone, debating whether to call Paul or handle it myself. The rational part of me insisted it was nothing. Probably a draft knocking something over, or maybe Paul had forgotten to lock the door earlier. But that nagging sense of dread pushed me to act. I didn't want to go back upstairs, but I also couldn't ignore the sound. Clutching a flashlight, I hesitantly climbed the stairs, each step creaking loudly beneath my weight. The hallway felt colder than before, and the faint hum of the projector was oddly absent. As I approached the booth, the door stood ajar again, just as I had left it hours earlier. Only now, the light inside was off, leaving the room cloaked in shadows. Taking a deep breath, I nudged the door open with the flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness. The room was a mess. The scattered papers were now joined by a toppled chair and an overturned trash bin. My pulse quickened as the flashlight's beam caught something on the far wall. The box cutter, now stuck into the wood paneling as if it had been thrown. My breath hitched, and I stumbled back, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The room felt alive with tension, as though something or someone was watching me. I turned to leave, but the unmistakable sound of footsteps stopped me in my tracks. They were slow, deliberate, and unmistakably close. My grip tightened on the flashlight as I prepared to run, the reality of the situation sinking in. I wasn't alone. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the booth, slow and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively stepped back into the shadowed room, clutching the flashlight tightly. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out the faint creaks of the floorboards. Whoever was out there wasn't rushing. They wanted to be heard. I tried to steady my trembling hands, holding the flashlight like a shield. My first instinct was to run, but the thought of encountering whoever was in the hallway stopped me. I considered hiding, but the cluttered booth offered few options. There was only the desk, the overturned chair, and the oppressive silence pressing against me. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. The crack of light from the hallway narrowed as the door slowly swung open. My chest tightened as the figure stepped inside, their presence casting a long shadow against the far wall. The flashlight beam caught them briefly. A man in a hooded jacket, his face obscured by the dim light. His stance was calm, almost casual, but the tension in the air was unbearable. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and steady. My breath hitched as I took a step back, my mind scrambling for an explanation. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, though my voice felt small in the suffocating quiet. The man tilted his head slightly, as though studying me. In his hand was the box cutter, its blade catching the faint beam of the flashlight. He twirled it between his fingers, not threateningly, but with unsettling ease. "I told you," he said simply, his tone eerily calm. "You shouldn't be here." The man took a step forward, closing the distance between us. Instinctively, I moved back, bumping into the desk and knocking over a stack of papers. The sound seemed deafening in the quiet, but the man didn't flinch. My flashlight trembled as I tried to point it directly at his face, but he seemed unfazed, his focus unwavering. "I'm leaving," I said, though my voice betrayed my fear. My legs felt rooted to the spot, every muscle in my body screaming at me to move. The man didn't respond. Instead, he placed the box cutter on the desk beside me, the gesture deliberate and unnervingly calm. His gaze lingered on me for a moment before he turned and walked toward the door. I watched, frozen, as he disappeared into the hallway. The faint creak of the stairs was the only sound until silence returned, heavier than before. My legs finally obeyed, propelling me out of the booth and down the hallway, not daring to look back. The lobby felt like a sanctuary, but the emptiness was haunting. I locked the booth door and called Paul, my hands shaking as I explained what had happened. The police arrived within the hour, but the man was gone. No fingerprints, no evidence, nothing to prove he'd ever been there, except the box cutter still sitting on the desk. To this day, I can't explain his presence or his intentions. I only know the quiet of that booth will haunt me forever.